Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Joey in Beijing. After the Second World War, the Allied forces tried Japanese war criminals at the International Military Tribunal for the Far East in Tokyo. Well, the proceedings played a very important role in shaping the post-war Asia-Pacific order. So what is the legacy of these trials? And what lessons should be drawn from them? And how can those lessons continue to be used to protect peace at this moment? To talk about these and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Jia Xiudong, Senior Research Fellow at the China Institute of International Studies and NR Changan, author and columnist for CCTV-News. We'll also be joined by Professor Takasato Watanabe from Kyoto via telephone. But before we begin our discussions, let's take a look at some of the views shared at the International Academic Forum on the Tokyo trials and world peace in Shanghai.
70 years has passed since the opening of the Tokyo trial. 20 international law and history from China, Japan, the US, Britain, and New Zealand explained how the international trial has affected the world to this day. 95-year-old Gao Wenbin was the secretary of the Chinese delegation during the trial.
所以你日本老百姓不知道他们的军队到底在外面干了什么。
The Japanese people didn't know what their troops had done. After the Tokyo trial, many Japanese, especially women, all lowered their heads and felt ashamed when we walked out because their soldiers had committed so many inhumane crimes, including raping Chinese women. The Tokyo trial was a shock to the Japanese.
Former Japanese Prime Minister Murayama Tomichi delivered a speech by video. He said Japan should face the history of China and Japan relations and deal with the relations based on deep and profound reflections.
作家の村上春樹さんは、僕は戦後生まれで直接的な戦争責任はないが、記憶を引き継いでいる人間としての責任はある。それが歴史というものだ。簡単にチャレンジしてはいけないと語っておりますが、私も大変眼蓄のある村上さんの言葉をいつも日本の若者に語っております。日中両国の未来を担う青年交流の活発化を何としても実現すればなりません。
The Tokyo trial was convened in 1946 to try the leaders of the Empire of Japan for 3 types of war crimes. It deeply affected the establishment of the post-war world order.
The Japanese government had made the promise to accept the verdict of Tokyo trial in the past. However, the current government wants to abandon the promise, which damages the international reputation of Japan. It is very necessary and meaningful to look back at the Tokyo trial nowadays from this perspective.
The forum will last 2 days, and 6 sub-forums will be held on key issues of this historical event.
And we talk about the trial 70 years ago. Well, it has been 70 years since the Tokyo trial, or other known as the International Military Tribunal for Far East, ended its verdict. But it seems that is an event that shaped the post-Second World War order in some sense. How is that the case?
The Tokyo trials were held on the basis, according to the Cairo Declaration and Potsdam Proclamation, which set the foundation for the trials, because justice has had to be brought against those who committed war crimes and crimes against peace and humanity. So the trials were held, and the criminals, war criminals, were prosecuted, and justice was held. So that was a part of the world order envisioned by the people fighting the Second World War, and so that the dream of building peace after the end of the World War. So these trials contributed to justice upheld of the war, and also with the trials, people got to know, the atrocities and the value of peace, and that also contributed to the justice in post war history.
What do you think is the legality and also the ramifications of the Tokyo trial 70 years ago?
Well, in the history books, they talk about the Tokyo trials as the forgotten trials because Nuremberg took the center stage in this. Now remember, there was only 70 Class A criminals that were actually ever prosecuted. And by the mid-1950s, they had all been released, those who had not actually died in prison or had been executed. It's amazing to think at how aggressive the Japanese, because we're not just talking about the Japanese war in the U.S., we're also talking about the atrocities that happened in Korea, also in China, Philippines, all of these types of things, which started much, much earlier, not the Philippines, but in Korea and in China. So it's hard to believe that such a concerted effort and only 70 people. And there's been questions about this. Why was the royal family completely exonerated in this particular regard? Why were they never held accountable? And the feeling is, historically, is that the U.S. played an important role. General MacArthur was looking at Japan as basically a stepping stone into Korea and then rolling up into Russia. So he had no time or patience to try to do justice. What he was trying to do was ultimate goals of conquest, basically a U.S. hegemony taking over Russia because they feared communism.
So you are saying justice is not being totally served in Tokyo trials?
I think if you look at the fact that the history books within Japan have been altered to make sure that no one knows about this. They might have learned about it during the trials, but the history books don't reflect it. They talk about Nanjing as a police action that was taken to prevent locals from looting and killing, and there was never any acceptance. When you look at Shinzo Abe and the Yakushuni Shrine, the fact that these war criminals were actually moved from where they had been interned and entered into the Yakushuni shrine. It tells you things. And then you look at the current situation, the reversal of the peacetime constitution, the pacifist constitution, and the fact that Shinzo Abe still is hedging at all times about the responsibility. His own grandfather was complicit in this. He was in Manchuria operating a lot of the economic situation there, organizing it, using forced labor of Chinese and Manchurian people, and also very much in favor of rewriting the pacifist constitution when he was later things. Although he was indicted, he was never actually convicted.
Do you agree, Mr. Jia? Because there isn't enough soul searching in the first place, that's why it continued to have revisionist impulses in Japanese politics.
Of course, you know, who questioning the legitimacy of the Tokyo trials on several grounds. Actually, for example, they said, well, the Tokyo trials was not based on an agreement among the victorious powers. Actually, as I said earlier, this trial proceeded based on the Cairo Declaration and the Potsdam Proclamation, released by the powers waging a war against Japan's aggression. It was legitimate and based on international agreement. And secondly, said, well, the crimes used, the name of crimes used against the criminals, for example, the crime against peace, crime against humanity did not exist before the Second World War. Actually, that was kind of argument which did not hold water. And actually, the Tokyo trials set kind of precedent, and they charged those war criminals. And so also Mr. Aina Tangen mentioned the U.S. role in the fact that some Japanese people were not aware of the truth of the Tokyo trials. And the United States played a role in some aspect. First, it tried to relieve the Japanese Emperor Hirohito of war crime responsibility. And actually, the United States colluded with some of the war criminals to make sure that the emperor was not mentioned as part of the responsibility. Or actually, the United States told the Japanese that all responsibility should go to Hideki Tojo. And so that is one aspect. The second is that actually the United States even keep a secret of war crimes of the Japanese, establishing the Unit 731, which engaged in
chemical warfare,
experiments on living bodies, because it tried to use that kind of technology for itself. So that made many Japanese people not aware of the truth of it. And that kind of role by the United States has had a profound and lasting impact on Japanese people's understanding of the crimes committed by the Japanese army, by the war responsibility of the Japanese emperor at that time.
But as you said, this is out of a convenient solution for the occupation of Japan, because America wanted to rule Japan after the Second World War. It is a convenient solution to exonerate the emperor and rule Japan since then.
Absolutely. American policy towards Japan has always been about expediency. We have about 58,000 troops in Okinawa and a couple of other smaller bases inside Japan. It's not very popular, but it's always been seen as part of our Pacific strategy, kind of a land-based aircraft carrier, as you may say it. And it's been very important in the way that this pivot to Asia that has been being pushed, especially by Hillary Clinton and under the Obama administration. So it's always been about expediency, not necessarily about justice. If it had been, we would have had a repeat of the Nuremberg crimes. You would have had many more people brought to justice.
And that shadow, the cast of shadow, has been over us now,
yes,
at this moment. And we have another Japanese expert on the line, Mr. Takasato Watanabe from Kyoto. Mr. Watanabe, what do you think of the Japanese understanding about the Tokyo trials, and have they evolved in terms of perception and understanding about what happened 70 years ago?
The Japanese textbooks, especially in the junior high school and senior high school, they are talking about the Tokyo trials, but not so, you see, many parts and so long on the pages. So most of the young students of the junior high school and senior high school, they don't understand what happened in that period. So every year in August, Japanese newspapers are writing on those things. However, the readership of the newspaper is getting down and down. So the Prime Minister Abe is almighty, nearly almighty. However, the intellectuals and historians of Japan are keenly against Mr. Abe. So we are having, or in the midst of the heated discussion, what kind of position should we take for the world peace?
But generations of Japanese government seems to have been whitewashing that period of history, and that's why a lot of Japanese now still don't know much about the Second World War and the Tokyo trials.
We have, you see, so many demonstrations in August, especially. However, the youngsters, some of the youngsters are keenly, you see, aware of the atrocities done by Japanese military people, but most of the younger generation, they enjoy the TV entertainment, and so for my regret, it is not so big against the Abe administration. However, the senior people, they understand what really happened in Japan and also in the Asian continent represented by China, Korea, and other Asian nations. So I hope that, you see, mass media will write the correct things, and it is being done so far. However, the Japanese government are against that. So this is a problem for us. The emperor system itself, emperor himself, or the younger brother of the Showa emperor, was really against the invasion, and he recognized the war as the invasion war. So this is the strife even among Japanese people. However, now you see the Abe administration is I don't think it continues.
Okay. Many people compare what happened in Germany after the Second World War with what happened in Japan. It seems the Germans, they have a deep soul-searching, not only over what the Nazis did to the country, but also why they elected a Nazi government into power. What kind of a impact that kind of soul-searching and repentance have on the current Germany?
Well, Germany has taken their responsibilities quite seriously, but it just never happened in Japan. For all the reasons we talk about. Shinzo Abe's official position, and that he repeats, is that the acceptance of the Tokyo trials was just part of the surrender, and had nothing to do with local laws, and therefore was suspect at best. So he's actually undercutting the international justice system that was put in place at that time. Just simply we said, we're a defeated nation, we had no choice, we had no way to fight back. So I think there's, but the contrast between these two nations, who both have committed atrocities during this thing. And I'm not saying that other countries didn't. I'm just saying that we have proven that these things, I mean, what you're referring to, the Japanese Joseph Mengele, who was experimenting on live human beings for chemical and biological warfare, and just to see what would happen if you induce so much pain. This is inhuman. And these things happen. The Germans acknowledged it and have moved on. The Japanese never have. And at this point, as Professor Watanabe has pointed out, it's very difficult to see that it will happen. The younger generation is just simply not interested. Even if you told them about it, they just say that has nothing to do with me. So it's not something that's going to change. And I think it's one of the major issues within the East, because China still feels very, very strongly, as does Korea, as do the Philippines. Remember, there, 5% of the entire population was killed during the Japanese War. These are deep, continually kind of poked open by this kind of Japanese attitude that, no, it never happened, or it didn't happen that way, or we weren't responsible, whatever, this kind of escape from reality. And I think a lot for Shinzo Abe has to do with his grandfather and trying to save the family honor, trying to save the honor of Japan, but I don't think this is the way to do it.
All right. We've been talking about what happened 70 years ago at the Tokyo trials and its impact today. Don't go, we'll be right back. Well, talking about the Tokyo trials 70 years ago, Mr. Jia, do you think China's attitude towards the trials 70 years ago in Tokyo has changed at all? Because it seems back 60 or 50 years ago, not much talks on the Tokyo trials. Why it is being played up at this particular moment?
I don't think there's any change of the attitude of the Chinese government or the Chinese nation as a whole towards the Tokyo trials. And the Chinese government at that time participated in the trials, sent a judge and a prosecutor to the Tokyo trials. And but you know, at that time when the Tokyo trials took place, there was the Cold War already began between the United States and the former Soviet Union. Also, the Chinese nation was in the civil war between the Communist Party-led army and the Kuomintang. So the nation was still in the wartime. So not much attention at that time was paid to the trials, and also because the KMT government sent the judge and prosecutor to the Tokyo trials. So the New China, the government in New China did not talk much about that. But as time goes by, people, you know, also China as a whole, have come to realize the importance of that part of history, and it's very important to let people know more about the truth of the history. And it's very important for the people in Japan have a better understanding of the truth of the trials. Also, it's very, very important for the Chinese people and the Chinese youth have a better understanding of that part of history.
But the problem is there is a gap of understanding between the Chinese and the Japanese. The Chinese seem to never forget what happened in the Second World War, the atrocities of the Japanese aggressors. On the other hand, the Japanese young people tend to forget almost all of them. And with time pass on, probably that will happen on a larger scale.
Well, it could happen in China as well. I mean, you have new generations of students who, they hear about this, but it seems very remote to them as time goes forward. So I think it is an issue for older people, but I think the real issue here, and the reason we're talking about it, is that the attempts by the Shinzo Abe government to rewrite history is affecting current policy today, because it's pushing this aggressive militarization that they've been wanting under the, quote, new normalization. But this is pushing conflict in these areas. I mean, the issues about borders and disputes and things like that, whether it's with Russia, Korea, China, it doesn't matter. It is pushing the level of anxiety
From
in
the
area.
Japanese side, they think that Shinzo Abe's increasing tone of being more aggressive and bulk up his military is a response to the Chinese military buildup. What do you say to that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the way it's portrayed. They're trying to paint China as somehow the aggressor simply by size. The fact that as Japan's economy has kind of slid sideways for the last 20 years, and China's has risen dramatically. This has been a sore point for many Japanese. They see themselves, they were liked it when they were on top of the economic pinnacle. Now that they're losing ground year by year, great uncertainties, just the sheer size of China is threatening to them. Now he's taking that to a new level in his desire to rewrite history. And this is the real problem. Now the question is the U.S. going to continue to support this with a new president?
That's a new uncertain thing. With Donald Trump coming to power and he's promised to retrench American resources from Asia, will this change U.S.-Japan relations and China-Japan relations? And in what way?
Whoever comes to the White House, I believe that the United States still views its alliance with Japan as kind of bedrock of the U.S. presence in Asia Pacific. It's a bedrock for its security structure in the region around the world, and that's there is no exception actually for President-elect Trump. However, he may have a different approach towards Japan. For example, I think that he may ask Japan to have a bigger share, for example, for the U.S. military, but the Japanese government has said that, well, it will refuse to do so. And also, that may affect the U.S.-Japan alliance and relationship.
Do you also believe so, Einar, that this is just a bargaining chip for Donald Trump to increase a Japanese share of expenditure?
Well, actually,
or is it a strategic shift?
No. It's just PR, smoke and mirrors. The fact is, it's cheaper right now for the U.S. to station troops in Japan because they cover a large percentage of the cost already. He's saying you should cover all of it. All right, and he's saying the same thing to Korea. Korea currently pays 40% of the cost of troops.
But he meant to make a better deal out of South Korea and Japan.
He needs to say that he's getting money back for his very ambitious goals of showing that the U.S. is going to concentrate internally, become more isolationist. So in order to do that, he has to take something back with him. Look, I made a great deal. He sees himself as the great deal maker. So he's going to put pressure on himself and other governments to give him more money. Whether it's NATO, whether it's our previous allies, he's going to say, look, you have to pay for whatever that we're giving you.
That's why this has worried Shinzo Abe. Shinzo Abe, on his way to Peru APEC summit, he wants to meet President-elect Donald Trump. What do you think they will talk about? Or is it just about TPP or the security alliances? What will come of the talks?
I think both. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe would like to have TPP because he has actually invested a lot in the passage of the TPP before he goes to the United States for talk with President-elect Trump, asking the United States to stay in the Asia-Pacific focused economic. Also, he will talk about security and try to convince Mr. Trump that the importance of the U.S. Japan. Actually, Tokyo, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe would like to achieve his dream of building a so-called strong America. Japan. Try to change the security and foreign policy of Japan, and the United States is a pillar consider a pillar to support Mr. Abe's dream, and also he would like to share his assessment of of China. He may not say publicly about the so-called the China's threat, but he will use that as to try to convince Mr. Trump that the United States should accept Japan's role and Japan's argument of the military, the status quo of the military presence of the United States, and then ask Japan, the United States.
But obviously,
I have a little different read on that in the sense that, the U.S. was pushing trade and security, right? China has always been trade and development. But with TPP off the table, Donald Trump said under no way is he going to sign that. The trade part of the U.S. pivot to Asia is now gone.
Falls apart.
It completely
and what happened
falls apart.
To security part?
Well, the security part is just we'll give you money or you buy our weapons. All right, that's the thing. So if you buy our weapons, you're within our sphere. We will continue to protect you. But this is the issue
America
about
will
the
probably decrease its military footprint in Asia.
It's going to be a decrease around the world, except maybe in the Middle East. But it's questionable. No one really knows what Trump intends to do. He says, "I'm going to win. I'm going to win. I'm going to deal. I'm going to be the best." But we don't know what that translates into policies. We're only now just beginning to get a look at his advising team. And these are people who are not necessarily in the mainstream. They're very outside the box. Some of it could be beneficial to China in terms of one expert who's advising him has said he'd be interested in a relationship, much along the lines that she had originally stated.
Okay. So the triangle relationship between United States, Japan, and China is still something we have to talk about for a long time to come. And thank you for watching Dialogue. I'm Joe in Beijing. Goodbye.